Hello everyone, my name is Gabby, and let's talk about Dragon Ball Z Abridged Episode 60, Part 1. So the episode just came out a few days ago, and I've seen a lot of different kinds of responses for it. Some people love it, and a lot of people actually seem to kind of dislike, or at least are somewhat a bit kind of ambivalent towards some of the things that they put in the episode, some of the changes they made, and sort of the ways that they changed it. In particular, the way that they sort of handled Gohan's character and Android 16's character, and the whole sort of Gohan going Super Saiyan 2 moment. Now, as for somebody who has spent actually quite a long time in this fandom talking about different interpretations of Gohan, I felt like I just kind of wanted to give in my own 2 cents. Is Gohan a coward? Within canon, I don't really think so. Or at the very least, I don't think it was really intended. But at the same time, I still think it's kind of a valid reading that you could take for his character. There are moments where you could say it shows that Gohan does have bravery and is able to fight, but there are also some moments where Gohan clearly does sort of cower away from the fight. Even if you could sort of say that, at that point he got over it, so he's not a coward anymore, realistically, it's not like necessarily you have one lesson and then you never relapse back to that kind of character habit again. So I think really both interpretations are totally valid. I just think that the way Team Four-Star handled it was honestly quite fascinating because it made the Cell games kind of have a very sort of different vibe to it, very different kind of message and moral, and it's honestly quite interesting. This is the point where we start getting into headcanon territory, but this is personally the way that I personally interpret the Cell games in both the original and in the way that it's being interpreted in Dragon Ball Z Abridged. In both versions, it's essentially about Gohan's inner conflict and how Android 16 eventually kind of resolves that conflict, which leads to him being able to go Super Saiyan 2. But the inner conflict in both versions is the thing that kind of changes. In the original, Gohan's conflict is over the fact that he realizes that he doesn't actually want to hurt anybody. He has the realization that he actually doesn't have to hurt Cell if he can just get the message across to Cell that he can be able to beat him, so there's kind of no point to fighting. It's sort of like he thinks that if he can just get Cell to understand that his power would be enough to kill him, that Cell would basically stop and they can just deal with this whole thing without anybody having to get hurt in the first place. The way that this gets resolved is Android 16 basically explaining to Gohan that sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes there are going to be situations where no matter what, you basically have to get involved even if that means hurting somebody. Because sometimes there are situations and opponents where they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to care about you saying that you don't want to hurt them. It's not going to change anything. And basically the only way you can stop something bad from happening is by essentially standing up for yourself and confronting that thing head on. And importantly, if that situation occurs, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not like Gohan is making the wrong moral decision. In fact, if anything, he's making the right moral decision because he is fighting for the side of righteousness. 16 basically gives Gohan that kind of reassurance that even though he doesn't necessarily want to have this situation happen where he does get angry and does fight Cell and potentially kill him, that in life things like that can occur and he shouldn't be ashamed of it. It gives Gohan that reassurance that releasing his anger is actually okay and not something to be ashamed of, and then that's why he manages to do it. Whereas in the Abridged series, Gohan's issue is essentially that he's kind of running away, and he doesn't realize that that's the case. The reason why Gohan is a coward is that instead of fighting Cell, knowing that it might be difficult and he might even potentially lose, he tries to almost sort of use the easy way out by kind of just telling Cell, hey, why don't we just not fight instead because that's the easier option. Because if they can end their fight without Gohan getting angry, and without them really having to properly fight in the first place, then Gohan doesn't really need to try. He doesn't need to put himself out there, get the responsibility of everybody on his shoulders, and also potentially lose. What Android 16's speech does is essentially remind him that it's not just his own personal morals that are at stake in this fight. The fact is, if Gohan continues his inaction, the consequences of them are probably just as bad as him trying and actually failing. Yeah, sure, having to fight a bug monster for the sake of the planet and potentially being able to die is going to suck. But you know what also sucks? Trunks' life and Android 16's life, and how his family and friends right now are getting beaten to death by the Cell Juniors. 16's basically saying that If you really do care about everybody and care about wanting them to be safe, then you should do this even though it sucks. And it's those harsh words that make Gohan realize that he needs to stop hiding, at least for once, and actually stand up for himself, and then that makes him transform. I think they're both really interesting ideas and important morals to have. Really, one isn't necessarily better than the other, especially given that we haven't seen the rest of episode 60 yet, and that's probably going to inform the kind of morals of this story. That's kind of why I'm doing this video now and not just waiting until part 2 and 3 come out and we can understand the full context. I kind of wanted to respond to the criticisms now and give my thoughts now before we actually know what their intention is, basically just to see if I guessed right, to see if I understand it right, and also just because as of right now, the messages in this story are the things that I'm finding interesting, and getting more information might potentially even make it less interesting. For example, one thing I just kind of wanted to mention, my kind of almost sort of theory as it is, I don't know if this is intentional or not, I don't know if this is actually going to be in this series or not, but I kind of wonder if this sort of Gohan sort of cowardice, this idea is sort of like rooted in a kind of lack of self-esteem. The logic kind of goes that because you have a lack of self-worth, it sort of means that you don't have any faith that you'll be able to succeed in any sort of situation. Because you have no faith you'll succeed, you think that if you get put in a situation where you have to perform, then you won't win. Because you think you won't win, when you get forced into that situation, you basically try and get any sort of escape out of it because you don't really want that kind of proof that at the end of the day, no, you can't succeed in something even though you tried. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's totally 100% an accurate interpretation that Gohan definitely has self-esteem issues, but I would definitely believe it if that was the case. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had to say. I think that the way that they're doing episode 60 at this point is honestly legitimately interesting, and it actually kind of made me think about my own personal politics. I was watching a parody about a show where people punch each other really hard, and it started making me think about my life. I think that's honestly a really big achievement. So I'm really looking forward to part 2 and part 3 whenever they come out. And maybe once they all come out, I'll kind of get a bit more in-depth into this whole thing and not just kind of have a random rambling thing. I'm not exactly sure, I guess we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next few episodes, and I hope they live up to the hype. So this is Gabby signing out, and goodbye guys!